I prefer being face-to-face, of course. So, welcome. So I have 4 weeks. We're going to talk about a few things, sort of new and old. And so, yeah, of course, I bring stuff every week. I have some things I really want to get through, but I'm actually here for you. So I'd like to make sure that I'm talking to things about things you're interested in. So please do ask questions, send me emails during the week, interrupt me while we're here. It's fine, I don't mind. I like it. And so what I'd like to start with, actually, for those of you who are, maybe if you have a notepad and pen with you, or even just whatever, just for a moment, and note this is something for yourself, not for me. Just consider for a moment, why you're here, what it is. Really have a think. What is it that you want to know? What brought you here? What do you want to get out of these sessions? And just write down some notes or have a think about it. And the reason I'm just asking is, so now if you have a sense of why you're here, then it might help asking some questions, checking in maybe during the week, or what you would like to hear about next week. And yeah, so you guide me is basically what I'm saying, so that if there's stuff you're interested in, let me know. So here's how we're going to start. So I've sort of been asked to come in here. I'm here to show the way in which Buddhism and psychology can interact in a way that is kind of most helpful, most beneficial. Not a unification, right? It's not like it's never going to happen. Not a unification of the two, but a way that the two sides can maybe collaborate and use each other's strengths to take care of perhaps some of the let's call it weaknesses in each side. While I'm at it, I want to show some quite exciting, very, very recent work that's been done in the field just in the last year or so. That's really, really changed the way I think about a few things, actually, and a little bit more inspired about all of this. One of the things I'm going to start with, which many of you heard before, so I just roll through. Here's one of the problems we have when we integrate, or when we look at both Buddhism and psychology. And I'm going to start with psychology. So in a sort of medical model that we use in psychology for the time being, sadly, we have what's called a syndrome. This gets important in a moment. A syndrome is a cluster of symptoms for which the cause is unknown, right? So you think about autoimmune deficiency syndrome, AIDS in the 80s, right? Well, now too, but it started when it first started presenting. People knew there were obviously people were sick with the same cause, but didn't know what it was. So it gets this term syndrome. Eventually, you find the virus, you find the HIV virus, you find which is the cause. And once you have a cause, it's no longer a syndrome, it's a disease. It goes from being a syndrome to a disease. And that's the marker once we know the cause. It would have been the same with COVID, I'm sure. In China, people are getting sick and dying, and then they're looking for the cause. So you've got a syndrome at first that becomes a disease. And it's a disease when we know there's a cause. When there's a cause, we can start talking about a cure. If there is no cure, if there's no cause, we can only talk about treatment, right? Quite effective treatment often, but it's only treatment. So this is where we're at. If you look in the DSM, the Diagnostic Statistical Manual, which is where not all psychologists use this, but it's a pretty standard, very, very big book, full of all these different mental disorders. So that's how they classify different types of ADHD and depression, anxiety, and so on. And in the DSM, the total number of mental diseases is how many do you think? Some of you probably know. What do you think? Just have a guess. How many mental diseases are there? 100. Good guess. But it's less. It's about 100 less. That is exactly 100 less. It's 0. There isn't a single mental disorder in the DSM, in psychology in general, for which a cause is known. This is not controversial. I learned this from psychology lecturers at Sydney University talking about this. Every single mental illness is a disorder or a syndrome, right? Because there are clusters of symptoms. We don't know the cause, not a single one. If you don't know the cause, I'll repeat, you cannot develop a cure. You can develop treatments, sophisticated, effective treatments, absolutely. Clever ones too. Cures, no. So when you're looking at these mental disorders in the DSM, that people are being diagnosed with, and you say, well, what's the cure? The answer for every single one of them is there is not a cure. All of them, without exception. Which isn't as dire as it sounds. I'm just trying to be dramatic, because it's the beginning, and some of you don't know me. But it's true. That's just where we're at. Just being honest. So that's interesting, because then when you flip over, and I'm just going to repeat myself so I don't get people, I don't want to upset anyone. There are very sophisticated, very clever, very well-researched treatments for a lot of those disorders. It's just that the cause isn't known. And this is, we have antidepressants just don't work for everyone with depression. Sometimes anti-anxiety medication works for depression and so on. And even when you do medicate people for something like anxiety, over time you have to change the medication because it wears off. Why does it wear off? I don't know. Right? Don't know. So that's where we're at. And then it's interesting, you flip over to Buddhism. And although there's a lot of talk about different mental states and different types of suffering and all these kinds of things, in Buddhism, it's like the main talk or the main conversation is just around suffering. It's about suffering, and there is a cure. This is why it gets really interesting. The Buddha is kind of, Buddha Shakyamuni looked around. He saw people are suffering of all different things, but he sort of narrowed it down to, what am I going to do about this? Like the root cause of the whole thing. He's like, there's this misapprehension of the self. We'll come to this. So many of you know at least as well as I do. He sort of identified a root cause, and having identified a root cause, actually developed a cure, and then treatments. This is the whole Four Noble Truths, right? Understand the disease, understand the syndrome, suffering, right? Understand the cause. Once you understand the cause as a disease, so you can start to think about curing the disease and the treatment for doing that. But very little of what Buddhism talks about in terms of curing suffering will be accepted or really sort of hold water in psychology for good reasons. Scientists aren't so interested in first-person examinations and this sort of stuff. So that's where we're at. Here's what gets interesting for me, at least, and hopefully for you, but we'll see if you're here next week. I'll know. That we've got this diagnosis of suffering, and we have a treatment for it. Actually, have a cure for it would seem, and people are trying it. But the cure, interestingly, is about disabling mechanisms of suffering, and this is important. It's not like Buddhism isn't about finding things necessarily to do that will make you happy or make you enlightened. It's about liberating you. It's about disabling the mechanisms that create suffering. And if you disable them, you get a sense. If you disable them permanently, liberation, enlightenment, maybe, depending. Right? It's about the mechanisms. And so you flip back over to psychology, and this conversation around mechanisms is very new, actually. And when you look into things like, so now we'll just move into this kind of field where mindfulness, where Buddhism and psychology are interacting. Something like mindfulness, they've done a lot of work. There's a lot of, evidence, if you like, that that say mindfulness training, Buddhist practices can dial down anxiety, depression, OCD, all sorts of things. And a massive pull in the literature, in the research literature, which has been highlighted for maybe 7 or 8 years now, is that people are not looking into the mechanisms. Why does it work? So people just throwing mindfulness training at all these things, and it does seem to work overall. Like overall, it does seem to work, but people aren't talking about why. And if you don't know why, then it's pretty hard to refine the methods or to target particular populations or do any of this if you don't know the reason it works. And so this has been highlighted as a really big issue. So a few years ago, when I sort of stumbled into a PhD research program, to do, that's what we looked at. We looked at exactly this. What are the mechanisms by which mindfulness training can reduce? Well, I used anxiety and depression. Anyway, I don't want. We can go through this some other time. I don't need to go on about my PhD anymore. But the point is that in what we can do, this is one of the sort of exciting interactions between Buddhism and psychology, is that all of my background in studying and translating Buddhist from Tibetan to English and all this stuff, and I have a degree in psychology as well. So then that I can try to find, we can find as much as possible where the Buddhist ideas of mechanisms that we find in Buddhism might translate over to sort of terminology and methods and so on that psychologists are going to be okay with. My whole goal was to write a thesis and a couple of papers that really drew on a Buddhist understanding of psychology and the mind, and have a non-Buddhist psychologist just read it and sort of nod their head and stamp it, which is what happened, right? So that's great. So in amongst all this, so what I thought I might do then is just roll on into a really simple demonstration of these mechanisms that I'm talking about. So here's a really simple model. I'm going to get a lot more sophisticated than this very quickly. When you're looking at mechanism, here's the thing we know we're quite confident from a research perspective. Attention degrades over time. Your attention skills, if you leave them alone, will just get worse, right? You'll become more distractible and it's less to focus. Less easy to focus, your sustained attention will degrade over time. If you get put under stress, absolutely, it degrades much faster and it becomes problematic. This is worth thinking about, because if you think about, say, a school semester or a uni semester or something like this, when people maybe show up quite relaxed after a holiday, and then they get to work and then they start studying and they get more work and work, probably have a job as well, and the stress builds and builds and builds, right? And that these people's attention degrades over a semester. And when do we give them examples? At the end of it all, when the stress is at its peak and their attention skills are at their worst. This is how our system's been working all this time. One of the problems with having poor attention skills is we have this emotional reactivity increases. So attention skills go down, emotional reactivity increases. What we know about emotional reactivity is it's a type of stress that degrades your attention. So you get set up into this feedback loop, negative feedback loop, where as I get put under stress, my attention kind of gets worse, my emotional reactivity sort of increases. The reactivity itself harms my attention, and poor attention skills is actually a really big driver of what? Emotional reactivity. It sets up into a downward like a feedback loop that just heads downwards. And this is just from doing nothing, basically. If we don't intervene, this is kind of the state we're in. It's interesting, in Buddhism, we have the same sort of idea, right? Like, I mean, beings don't tend to go up. Anyway, I don't want to get too religious on everyone yet. So that's where we're at. It looks a bit like this, attention and emotional reactivity, they play on each other. They're different, but they're incredibly related, closely related. Then you can start to throw really simple psych ideas in here, like a negativity bias. And we know this, actually, we will tend to prioritize, and our attention selection system will prioritize things that are threatening, things that we will interpret neutral as negative, right? You'll learn this in a first-year psych course. This is not sort of controversial. But then so what happens, of course, is as my attention skills degrade and the negativity bias feeds in, my attention is more easily captured, and is it captured by people doing cool, inspiring, exciting things? Or is it captured by people doing annoying things, or people interpreting people just going about their day and me finding them irritating? I'll tell you what, I won't embarrass you. It's the latter, right? That's what happens. So you've got even this simple negativity bias that's built into us as humans. We're sort of cultivated, if you like, over natural selection through evolution. Then we put ourselves in a 21st century sort of attention damaging system, situation, which is just anywhere in the 20th century almost. And then your emotional reactivity sort of gets piled up, and then your attention's attracted to negative things and captured by things you interpret as negative in the way you go. This is where we're at. So it's a very clear mechanism. It's very simple, right? That can actually, if you don't do anything, if you don't intervene, can lead to outcomes like anxiety, depression, and so on. It's hard to intervene, of course. It's very hard to question any of this because it's so automatic, right? And it just happens so often, just repeats. And as it repeats in this automatic repeat system, then it just greases the wheels more and more, and it becomes easier and easier and faster to react in this particular way. So it's easier for your attention to be captured. It's more likely to be captured or interpret things as negative, which sets off an emotional reactivity in the way you go, right? It sort of forms a habit. And one of the purposes of mindfulness training, in both from a Buddhist perspective and certainly from psych, is it's designed to try to reduce all this, to try to intervene. So you've got a mechanism, I would argue, for a mechanism that causes suffering, right? Up here. Yeah, sure. Mindfulness training, it can help. It can help in a big way. I've heard of this. Yeah, that's right. That's right. You get into these cycles where, and of course, even if you are getting bored and stressed at your job, it's also, maybe things are stressful outside, right? Like it's not as if it's only work, it's everything that's going on. Yeah, absolutely. Going and repeating these things, feeling a lack of purpose, it's a big issue. Absolutely. And so, yeah. Of course, if you think about, then if you put people into high pressure jobs, and that doesn't have to be like emergency room people, it can be paramedics and these sort of people I've dealt with a lot over the years. But it can just be anyone who's under stress because their kid's sick, or their problem at home with their mother's sick, there's father's sick. There's all sorts of things that feed into this. When we talk about stress, it's not just I've got a deadline, it's just everything. And then you throw things into the mix that are literally designed to harm your attention. This is how they make money. And not the phone, but the apps on your phone, right? Designed by people with postgraduate degrees with the motivation of capturing your attention, right? And destroying your controlled attention so they make more money. Yeah, it's problematic for sure. But a mindfulness training will interrupt all this, right? It's not the solution. It won't break these cycles and mechanisms, but it will interrupt them, and it will certainly give you space, right? In fact, if you really put this together, what you'll get is this. You can reverse the feedback loop. So if you do a little bit of training, and we'll do a couple of meditation sessions, throughout the 4-part series. We'll do one in a moment. What you have is this. You've got at the moment, maybe with no training and no sort of understanding, then my attention is very easily captured. It tends to be captured by things that are maybe negative, very easy to set up an emotional reaction, which harms my attention skills and so on. One of the things that mindfulness training will do certainly the system that I work in and we'll look at, is it's sort of designed to help you notice when your attention's been captured and what's happened. You notice that it's captured and you have a contingency plan, you have a plan for that, when it's captured. So that you can actually set up the feedback. You can do some mindfulness training to interrupt this downward spiral, great. But actually you can also use it so that now when I notice that my attention's captured, then I actually very intentionally sort of bring it back, and the emotions never really get momentum, right? The emotional reactivity never gets any momentum. And the sooner I can notice my attention sort of captured and going off into difficult places and into the bad neighborhoods and so on, I can pull it back to this. So in actual fact, noticing that you're distracted can work in your favor, and you can set up a feedback loop in the opposite direction. So that as I notice that, my mind's pulled away and distracted, and I immediately notice that, it becomes like a cue to do a really brief bit of mindfulness training. It's like, oh, it's captured. Just relax and bring it back. Then the emotional reactivity dies down, which gives me more space until it happens again. And the sooner I can intervene in this, notice that this mechanism is at play, this attentional capture mechanism is at play. The sooner I notice, the sooner I can intervene, and the sooner I intervene, the less damage is being done to my attention skills. You can set yourself up in a very gentle feedback loop in the opposite direction. So it's like, as I notice my attention is captured, that's this flag to pull it back. Of course, if you don't do some meditation, formal practice sitting on the cushion, it's probably not likely. That's where we're at. So I would like to run through the type of training. Let me just say that again. If you're not doing some formal meditation training, this reversal of the feedback loop, I would argue, is not possible, right? Like, it's just not. You need to do some serious training. Which we'll look at. We'll look at some very simple ways to do this, which we'll do right now. You have three postures, actually. Maybe at home, you can use, if you're sitting in a chair, just make sure your hips are all the way back, right? So you slide them as far back as you can. In these chairs, it's kind of good to have a cushion behind you if you can, because you want to have this, you want your back straight, but you want to be able to lean back into the backrest. If you're sitting down, so we don't have cushions on the floor today, but if you're at home and you're sitting, your knees need to be higher than your hips. So if you are sitting like this guy, please just get a chair. I went looking for pictures years ago of people sitting well in meditation. I couldn't find anything. I could only find these things, and that looks so uncomfortable to me. Yeah. So today, again, your hips need to be higher than your knees. Okay. So you should be sitting on something. This one just gets me angry, because look at this. His knees are way up here, and there's like a cushion right behind him. It really bugs me. You could just be sitting. Now you're putting insight into what annoys me. Oh, sure. It's because it should be a tripod. The weight should be on your knees and your bum. That's how it works. It's very, very stable. Once you're like this, you can't do it. You're activating all these extra muscles just to stay put. Whereas if you have, and this is just, I'm just regurgitating the way I was taught, right? Once you're down like this, it's very stable. And it's very easy to relax into it as well, because you want your back to be straight. Yeah. I did find this person who presumably has grown up sitting cross-legged, so that she has an advantage in here. But again, there's just this idea you want your knees touching. For our purposes, a lot of yoga places, they do these little mudras and things. It's cool. I'm totally for it. Except in this system, what we're working for is a really, really deep kind of natural relaxation. So your hands should just be natural. None of these things, right? If you go to a yoga class, then they tell you to do that. Then I just do what I'm told. But here and now, just hands flat on your lap, or like we saw. Okay. So let's just do this. Let's just roll through a quick session, talking through it. The first thing is just take a moment to recall why you were here. You've already thought about it once. But in doing the meditation practice, what's your longer term goal for it? Start with yourself. Less emotional reactivity. Maybe that improves relationships. Maybe, of course, from a Buddhist perspective, it's very easy, liberation and enlightenment and these things. But make it about yourself. What are you trying to get in order in your mind, in your life? And then as best you can, develop an aspiration that there be some flow-on effect to benefit others. And with that motivation at play, Scan through the body, just start between the eyebrows, work your way down. In fact, I'll talk you through this. Just start between the eyebrows. And what you're looking for is muscular, physical tension that's unnecessary. When you find it, just linger on it for a moment or two. Allow it to release just a little and move on. So in the cheeks, even your jaw and your throat. Shoulders, elbows, wrists, even your fingers, just relaxed, natural state. Even your spine, straight but relaxed. Hips, thighs, you're just working through the body. And if you find tension that's unnecessary, just releasing it. Best you can. It will not be perfect. Doesn't matter. Through your ankles and even your toes. And just do that one more time in your own time without me interrupting you. Start between the eyebrows, work down. Just releasing unnecessary tension. Then, once you feel your body is just resting in its natural state, relaxed, just allow your awareness into the body. The classic instruction is like a fragrance filling a room. And just very gently direct your awareness to the sensations of the body moving as you breathe. You can ignore all your ideas and opinions. Just focus in on the physical sensation of that movement. Whereas at some point you'll get distracted and that's fine. In fact, it's good if you notice, so you just relax, release, reset your attention back on the sensations of the body moving. And from time to time, just as a support, do a quick scan through the body to see if you're tensing up, if you need to release any tension. And a quick check in your mind, am I distracted? It's basically a question, how am I doing? My body and my mind. Do I need to make an adjustment? You just switch it off and get back to an uninterrupted flow of attention on the sensations of the body moving as best you can. And if at some point you notice you're distracted or getting tense in the body, it's good that you notice, just adjust. Release the tension, bring your awareness back. And at any point, if you notice you're distracted, it's good that you notice. You just relax, release, reset. You might find it helps to just incrementally relax as you exhale without losing clarity. And just sharpen your focus as you inhale naturally without losing relaxation. If you find yourself sort of getting drowsy, that's okay. Just allow that inhalation to wake you up. Or if you're agitated and distracted, allow the exhalations to settle you down, just happening naturally. Really, your only job is just to rest, aware of the movement of the body, making adjustments if necessary. Just allowing it all to happen. And without changing anything, just resting right where you are. Again, remember your motivation for doing the practice. And really try to feel some momentum right here towards achieving that goal of what you're working towards. Okay, so just a short little intro. Is that all right? Any questions or? So I want to run through a couple of bit of terminology, and this will take us into what I wanted to talk about today. Just in these, what to me are source languages, Sanskrit, Pali, and Tibetan. So I speak fluent Tibetan and have a degree in Sanskrit. And this word we translate as meditation means habituate or familiarize. I really like cultivating something. What would you cultivate? Well, empathy, kindness, compassion, mindfulness would work, you could say. So then, well, mindfulness, while we're on it, really just translates as remember or to bear in mind. It takes on a bit of a different connotation extra in Buddhism, but for the most part, that's what it means. Certainly in the Indo-Tibetan system. And what would you remember? You're trying to, at that time, we're trying to remember a focal object, which was the sensations of the body moving. But you might also want to remember your bigger picture goals. If I'm trying to form a better relationship with somebody who I have a history with, I've got to remember that's what I want to do, even when they say and do annoying things. I might have a coworker or someone that I want to, same thing. I want to work more collaboratively with. There's all these things, mundane things that is important to remember my longer term goal, to bear that in mind as I act. For our purpose, the focal object, of course, is just the object that you're attending to, the object that you are essentially remembering. That's where we're at. To come back to this sort of idea again, what's happening for us is as we increase our attention skills, the emotional reactivity dies down and so on. So as our attention is being pulled away and captured, we're reducing them. And so I would argue in the beginning, for many of us when you learn to meditate, the real issue at first is just coming to understand the difference in the experience of having your attention controlled versus captured, right? And then when you've sort of got that, you're like, okay, they're very different, they feel very different. Then you have this introspection that monitors it. So when you know that, oh, my attention's pulled away, it feels like this, and I know what to do, relax, release, reset, or whatever. Okay. So that's this interruption that we're trying to get happening here. Improve your attention, down your emotional reactivity. You're not at the mercy of your negativity bias. Why? Because your attention's under your control, and so on. And then, we'll come back to this in a moment, actually. Okay. So I'm about to show you, after this slide, the model. And so I got a full disclosure. I came up with this model last summer I was here, and I came up with it purely to sort of counteract a pet peeve of mine, right? That I'll explain in a moment. But after I did it, I realized actually that it really works. And this is what I'm going to base today and the rest of today and the following few days on. First, my pet peeve. Here's a definition of mindfulness from Asanga. So an Indian scholar from a text published by Bhumi, non-forgetfulness of the mind in relation to a familiar object having the function of non-distraction. Easy. What it means is, if you're distracted, you kind of forgot. I said I was going to do this, and then I got distracted, or I forgot. It's no big deal, right? And so that's it. You'll notice, if you have any familiarity with the modern sort of popularized versions of mindfulness, there's nothing about non-judgmental moment to moment. This is my pet peeve. Here it is. You won't, well, if you do, let me know. You're unlikely to find this non-judgmental as an accurately translated term in any definition of mindfulness, right? It's a new invention. It's come in the last 60 years or so. It's also not very clear what they mean by non-judgmental, but that's another pet peeve. We'll come to that one later. And then my second pet peeve, number 2, is that when you mostly learn these practices, you're usually taught, certainly the Buddhist, certainly the Tibetan system, that you're learning 2 things. You're learning mindfulness, which is placing your attention and trying to hold it there, this sustained attention, and introspection. You're monitoring that. So you think about what we're just doing, trying to pay attention to the sensations of the body moving, and then also notice if I'm getting tense, notice if I'm getting distracted. 2 separate things, right? And you train in both. In the beginning, and so in about, not maybe next week, I'm going to really drill down on this. At the beginning, you have what we call propositional mindfulness, which is literally a question. It's like, how am I doing? How am I doing? Am I tense? Am I distracted? How am I doing? It's literally kind of this interruption, really, to what you're doing. Just keep checking. Over time, you need this less and less, right? You need it less and less. And in fact, you start to rely on what's called non-propositional mindfulness. Introspection. And non-propositional introspection is now you're talking about these non-dual systems like Dzogchen and Mahamudra, a lot of Zen, and these sorts of systems. And I'll bring in and I'll summarize this paper for you from John Dunn and some others is really interesting on this. So that once you get the hang of this, of checking in on yourself, and you do it less and less and less, you don't need you can abandon this propositional introspection altogether and just rely on what we call background awareness. Not only that, then you can release the focal object and only use this, right? The sort of background awareness. And the reason I'm mentioning it now is because one of the reasons is because unless you do some explicit training in it, there's a lot of obstacles along the way to getting really good at it, right? A lot of obstacles. And this introspection idea has been basically, again, left out of the modern kind of popularized versions of mindfulness. They sort of talk about mindfulness, they don't add this introspection, which is a shame, because 2,500 years has been integral, and it's really important in developing, in branching into these non-dual systems, which are just really interesting. See, it depends which system you use. If you look in a lot of those Theravada systems, they'll talk about it as things like clear comprehension. Yeah, and it's a bit different. Yeah. In that system, I know you've studied this, but in this system, it's this very explicit checking. Shantideva calls it a monitoring of the state of body and mind. Just checking in, but not so much. Yeah. I've just read a really interesting paper on that too. I'll bring this stuff in because it's really, I'm getting more and more interested in the crossover and within Buddhism too. Because remember, I'm presenting an idea from the Indo-Tibetan system specifically, right? This is not true in other systems, that there's not total agreement with this. There's also not a lot of fighting about it, which is nice. Right, here we go. So remember, I have these pet peeves. And because of these pet peeves, I came in with this little slide last time that I'm about to show you, because I wanted to explain one of the reasons why the non-judgmental part of mindfulness definitions is a bit frustrating. It's not terrible, it's just a bit confusing and unnecessary in opinions. So here's me. Corey engages with an object of some kind. Okay. Now, the very next thing that happens very, very quickly is one of 3 things. right? There's a reaction. I interpret this object as positive, negative, or neutral. It's easy. Okay, so this has happened within a couple of moments of engaging with an object. So Corey, object, positive, negative, neutral. From there, right? So now we're in this conceptual domain. From there, it proliferates out further, depending, into emotions, right? These are like, the feelings are like proto-emotions in a way, prototypical. So Corey engages with an object. He interprets it as being good, bad, or good, neutral, or bad. Whichever of these interpretations happens, proliferates out into emotions. No big deal. Okay. If these emotions get out of control, so that is, I experience them at higher intensity and frequency than maybe is healthy or adaptive, then I run into this psychopathology. You know, maybe fear, I end up in anxiety, sort of, you know, diagnosis, if you like, or depression from sadness, and certain dysfunction from anger. And although I'm not going to go on about it too much for now, but it's also true for these enjoyable emotions also. They can be pathological if they're out of whack, if they're not in balance. So what we've got is this, right? This is a very simple model, right? Corey engages with the object. He interprets it one of three ways, and away we go. Yeah. Okay. Oh, yeah. I put that in there actually during the CEV course because a lot of people enjoy it. So as an enjoyable emotion, yeah. Because it's great to be so superior to everyone. Yeah, it's and it's a good example of how something destructive can be enjoyable, you know, because contempt, but it has, like all emotions, it has its place. Contempt will actually avoid confrontations but still maintain a social order. So for example, a little flash of contempt, if somebody pushes in a line or something like this, you know, like when someone is breaking the rules and you know how to flash some contempt, it might avoid an actual altercation, but it might also like have somebody rethink their behavior, right? So for example, sorry, I know I'm repeating story. I try not to, but yeah. When I was at Sydney Uni, I was in my 40s when I went back to uni, when I came back from India. And the fourth level of the Fisher Library, where I used to do quite a lot of study, is allegedly silent. Yes, signs are everywhere. And I was, you know, twice the age of a lot of people who were there who weren't as silent as me, right? And so, which is kind of annoying. Of course, I'm trying to get work done, but I also have this background in facial expressions and emotions and everything. So I tried it out, like what will work. And you know, if you get angry at someone, you get pushback. If you start glaring at them, you know. Now they, especially because I'm a mature student, and everyone knows mature age students are boring and worthless, you know, if you're young, right? So you sort of like glare at them and just get always do nothing to make it worse. Look sad, you just confuse them. Contempt works. Still flash like this because they know it's silent, right? And it's just like it's kind of like, what's wrong with you? They're like, oh, you know, you see them deflate. It was really effective. Yeah. So and of course, because I'd done this CEV training, that's why I tried it. And yeah, I'm on board. So it was quite enjoyable, is my point. Yeah. I mean, I did not do the statistics. I wish I had. But I would argue for a statistically significant decrease in noise based on. Oh yeah, but it's the fourth floor. Once you're on the third floor or the fifth floor, it's none of my business. Fourth floor. Absolutely. Yeah. There's even more variables, but we're talking about feelings in like here in Vedanta. So yeah, absolutely. So that's so we're talking the feelings. It happens instantly. It's like the first thing that happens. You engage with something. There's a feeling. It is dependent on your prior association with it, but not just that, which we'll come to in a moment. So thanks for that. So let's flip it out. Let's change the object to pizza. Okay. So Corey engages with pizza for the most part, positive response. You know, I'm going to interpret that positively, going to run into enjoyable emotions, and away we go. Okay, that's cool. As we go though, as we work through this, it's possible that I have 12 slices of pizza, right? So the first slice of pizza, no worries, positive response. If we get to the 11th slice, right, it's possible that I will no longer be interpreting it as positive, more than likely. It might even be negative, actually. And when I brought this model out last time and talked about it, in fact, slice number 11 or 12 of this pizza could also lead to any of these three as well. Fear, anxiety, or I'm sorry, fear, sadness, or anger. So the point about this is that it's not just the object. This is the point I want to make, right? Same object, different interpretation. Different interpretation here, different feeling, right? Leads to different emotional reactions and so on. That's the point that I'm trying to make. Is that all right? Is this clear enough? Yeah. So, you can do this. I mean, you can have, I don't know, a favorite song, and then you've heard it 100 times, and there's no, names like, oh, I don't want to hear that again. You can have these sorts of. It depends. Even my dog is a great example. Same dog doing the same thing, and sometimes I'm really pleased, and sometimes I really wish you'd go somewhere else because I'm busy. Same object, but the feeling response is different. And the reason this is important for us, right, is that it's not coming from the object. Right? That my positive response clearly can't be, right? Otherwise, like for example, if pizza had the potential to make me happy, then the more pizza I ate, the happier I'd be. There's no way around this. I mean, my wife is another, like, I like this version because she's made, so Kirsty, I'm very happily married, but it's not like Kirsty herself is actually the source of happiness for me, because if it were, then we just have to be together all the time and we'd both be happy, which is laughable, right? We need time apart. So the point being, it's not from these objects, it's not from other people, it's not from this, it doesn't come from that. It comes from your interpretation of it. And the interpretation changes based on your circumstances. According to in the CEB system, there are 16 enjoyable emotions, different types. Things, things, some of them are sensory, but then there's also things like contentment or schadenfreude is in there, which is frowned upon. Another frowned upon enjoyable emotion is in there. Yeah. And here's what let's do this. If that's all right, here's where we're at. I would argue. Okay, remember we have psychology operating in a way that has very sophisticated and very quite effective treatment plans, right? No doubt. We have Buddhism, and Buddhism, where I'm claiming that Buddhism is this cure, right? As a cure for suffering. So you'd think, well, okay, if you have to choose between the two, Buddhism makes sense because you just get under the whole thing. But it's not quite that easy. And here's how I would sort of think about it. This area here, Corey, pizza, and the feelings, positive, negative, neutral here. This is basically the Buddhist playing field, right? This is where we're talking. If you want to sort of start to get under suffering, this is where you're looking, right? You're looking at engaging with objects and the feelings that immediately arise right there and then. The trouble is that's extremely difficult to observe. It takes very, very high attention skills to observe it at all, and certainly to maintain that. So what we get is this situation sometimes where people have, they're stressed or they have anxiety or something, and they maybe turn to Buddhism, which is great. Okay, there's some stuff. But then if you're only going to operate, if you get told to, that this is where you should be looking, it might not help. In fact, it could make it worse, which we'll come to. Whereas psychology, there's all sorts of things over here, actually, in terms of these mechanisms. So I was talking before about mechanisms. This is going to be a big feature going forward. These mechanisms that bring fear into anxiety, or fear episodes to anxiety, sadness to depression, all sorts of dysfunction from anger and so on. We have all sorts of treatments that will actually temporarily help. These are not cures, but they're treatments. Right? So one of them, for example, is we call granularity. This is just working. So I'm just pulling out of my my own research, but the sense that if you just train people, we call it emotional granularity. Some people call it experiential granularity. The point is, if you can actually start to understand and identify, let's say, your experience, let's say emotions specifically, just by understanding them and being able to identify them actually dials them down. It's a fascinating effect, right? But actually, because a lot of people will say, and when I hear, especially younger people now talking, they talk about being emotional, but rarely do people talk about being sad or happy or afraid or contemptuous or disgusted or whatever, right? There's no granularity in it. It's just I was emotional, and it's really not very helpful information. Someone says I was emotional. Were you happy or angry? I don't know which one. You're just emotional. It's not just one thing. There's different emotions, and they create different behaviors, and they create different thought patterns. There's all sorts of issues. So actually, there's several papers on this that are super interesting. That just by teaching people to be able to recognize, oh, that's anger, oh, that's contempt, that's fear, and so on, dials down the experience of the emotion. And the more you do it, the better. So, for example, fear, there are all these different types of them, or types of fear, different types of anger, different types of sadness, and so on. Fear is an easy one to kind of explain. If you think about the subjective experience of being afraid, there's different ways to this. If you encounter a fear trigger, so now I'm afraid, and I have a contingency plan, right? Like I know what to do. That experience is very different than in being in a fear situation where I don't know what to do. I don't have a coping mechanism. So there's coping, non-coping. That experience of fear is very different. So again, if you can train people to notice that, right? Then you get more and more subtlety, more and more granularity is the term, right? And the more people understand their experience as it happens, the less they're at the mercy of or the control of these experiences or emotions as they happen. This is very, very interesting. And it's cool because we have the same in Buddhism. Buddhism is very much about passing mental states. This is this, and this is this. And we have 51 broad ones. They even break down. That you can identify that, what's going on. And because if we can actually identify, say, in Buddhism, it's sort of like, if I have a particular mental state and I recognize it as non-virtuous, then I'm likely to try to intervene and do something. But if there's a mental state and I notice it and it's virtuous, I'm probably going to rest into it and cultivate it and try to develop a habit. So it's one of these interesting areas. It's very coarse, but where subtle, where Buddhism and science kind of overlap. Also, treatments like cognitive behavioral therapy, psychoeducation. Again, this is from not just mine, but we use this as well. Teaching people these mechanisms. So teaching people mechanisms by which their worry turns to anxiety, by their rumination turns to depression, and so on. Teaching them these mechanisms in and of itself can help. When you combine that with the real-time kind of training from the mindfulness, the real-time clarity or granularity from the mindfulness training, then it really has an effect. People know what's going on for them in real time. They can identify it and they know the system. They know what's happening. It sort of disables or at least dials down the intensity. So this is where we're working. If you're looking at it from a psych perspective, where we're going to be working maybe here. And this is the reason. So Corey engages with pizza, fine. A feeling arises. There's only 3 types of feelings in Buddhism, positive, neutral, negative. This arises. Actually, that happens too fast to notice for the most part without training. But doesn't end there. It's possible to be emotional for quite some time and not know you're emotional. Right? Evolution seems to have set this up. So it's actually possible as a human being not to really start to notice any of this till you're here, right? Like way across on the right-hand side. When you're in this anxiety, depression, some sort of stress or dysfunction. So have people not really, they're seeking help when they're here at this end, right? And if you turn to Buddhism and you're not careful, you're going to be thrown to this end, which isn't going to help. And in fact, it can possibly create some harm, depending on who you're talking to. Granularity is a bit like Rain Pertara. I can't remember her. I have come across her stuff, but I don't know what Rain stands for. I forget. Yeah, she's in on it for sure. Her, John Dunn. I'll go through those couple of papers in the coming weeks because it's super interesting. And but one of the things, of course, that got my attention, the reason I sort of came across them, is because the Cultivating Emotional Balance program that I've been teaching off and on for a very long time relies on that, right? Training people to understand emotions. Recognize, accept, investigate, nurture. Sure. This is where I get caught out, because here I am, I'm really advocating for learning and dealing with psychology and talking to psychologists. But me, myself, I'm kind of Buddhist and a bit of a fanatic. So I never really rely on this so much, if I'm honest. But I think it's important. To me, when I was studying psychology, when I went back to uni in Sydney, psychology's, and just to be clear, because maybe some of you don't know me, I'd been living in India for maybe 6 or 7 years, translating here for Tibetan to English and all this stuff. So then I went back and I studied Sanskrit at Sydney Uni, and while I was there, I did a psych degree, because you could just do a double major. And psychology to me seemed like life hacks, Seems a bit rude, but it seemed like they were mostly just kind of hacks. There was no longevity to much of it. They were mistaken about a lot of things about consciousness, which we might come to. Yeah, but that shouldn't be a problem. For example, I did this whole section on what we call context cues, which is to say particular patterns of thinking that are dependent on your environment. So for example, if you come in here and meditate, you meditate a lot in this room, then when you come into this room, there are physiological changes in your body. It's quite interesting. That will sort of draw you into meditation. And so that I got interested reading the research, because for thousands of years, meditation manuals have told us, try to find a place to sit up to meditate in a sitting place. It's kind of cool. So when I read some of this and started playing around with it, things like, if I was working and then I decided I wanted to check, scores of something or something that wasn't work related, I would pick my laptop up and do it somewhere else, like just at the kitchen table or something. So that room was only work and meditation. And this is brilliant and 100% from psychology. There's lots of things like that I totally rely on that, but sometimes I might seem like I be dismissive of it, which is rude of me. I should be more polite. Anyway, let me get back to being polite. Here it is. We're working over here. People aren't even asking for help till they're here, and so maybe if that's where you're at, your attention skills are probably problematic, the emotional reactivity is very high. We need other ways to get you sort of regulated to start thinking about these longer term solutions, I would argue. I'm going to give another little demonstration. And again, some of you know the answer to this, so in the interest of time, you can just shout it out. Imagine this. You're this person and you're meditating, it's very quiet. Or maybe you're this guy. Things are going pretty well. Meditation session, everything's great, and then for 5 full seconds, I play my favorite heavy metal guitar solo at full volume behind you, right? How long do you think that can distract you for? Just have a rough estimate. It's really loud. I've turned it up to 11. Just have a guess. So we've got 5 seconds. Do I hear 2 minutes? Yeah, you're right, of course. The maximum amount of time the guitar solo can distract you for is 5 seconds, because after 5 seconds, it doesn't exist anymore because I stopped it. And things that don't exist can't distract you, right? That should be uncontroversial. Can a unicorn distract you? No. Why? Because they don't exist. So that seems easy, right? Any objections? Yeah, go for it.
What's happening in your mind? That's the distraction.
So there's unicorns in your mind?
There's a representation.
Oh, thank you. And is a representation of a unicorn? Okay, is a mental representation of my dog? It's easy. It's not the same. Of course it's not, you know that. And so the same is true for the distraction, right? I play the heavy metal guitar solo for 5 seconds and then we turn it off. And if you're still distracted, you're doing it to yourself, reliving it. We do this. And there's a mechanism behind it, right? That does all this. There's different words for it. I, for a long time, called it cognitive fusion. This is how I learned it in CEB. More recently, this idea of reification is more common. I like it better, if I'm honest. And here it is: misapprehending, confusing mental activity for its referent. So, if I'm meditating and someone plays some music for 5 seconds, right? The music, for the 5 seconds of music is the referent, right? But then I have a memory of it is the representation, right? The memory is the mental representation of the referent. Is this okay? Some of you don't look like it's okay, so, slow me down. And what we can do as human beings, which is kind of interesting, is we can treat the representation as the referent. Yeah. And then away we go, right? Now it's like, I can be as if, I can picture my mother and be sort of emotional as if my mother was here or my dog was here, or I can remember a time where, my sports team lost in Game 7 of the Stanley Cup. There's all sorts of things I can do that I can remember and get sad about if I mistake the memory for the event. And only if. This is the important part. So what I'm getting to is this: the mental activity of all kinds, without exception, has no causal efficacy. It's inert. It can't do anything. It's completely powerless. All of it. Every memory, every dream, every plan for the future. Oh, wait. So yeah, of course. I agree. If you there's all sorts of stuff that's going to take some time to settle down in your body. If someone blasts the solo at you while you're meditating, I would still argue that the mental and the physio, you can pull them apart. It's a bit unfair, but I agree. Right? It's a bit hardliner, but it's true. If you're still sitting there, sort of getting angry about that event, remembering that event, I'm doing it for myself. Yeah, no one else. There's no input, right? So someone cuts me off on the highway, and I'm still angry about it 5 minutes later. There's no input, right? I'm doing it. The only person doing the anger is me. 100%. This gets uncomfortable, right? And so, for example, let's say a difficult memory, a difficult experience in the past. It's like that experience and that event is important, right? Critically important, absolutely. The event is very, very important. However, my memory of the event is not the event. And if I remember the event and go into this, living it as if it's happening, there's only one reason, and the term is reification. It's a cognitive mechanism that is setting that up. And there's nothing else. It's the only thing. Is that all right? I'm being really it's only this because I thought someone would react. No one's going to. It's pretty hard language to use. Some of you heard it before. So this idea of reification, misapprehending or confusing mental activity was reference, so memory for an event, thoughts and ideas as facts, opinions as facts, right? Americans are stupid. You know what I mean? Canadians are polite. Yeah. I lived in Canada a long time. And they're mostly polite. Yeah, lots more, all over the place. There's a paper we'll look at in a week or so. I'll post it, give you access to it if you'd like to read it earlier. Here's how they describe de-reification. Reflects the degree to which thoughts, feelings, and perceptions are phenomenally interpreted as mental processes rather than accurate depictions of reality. I like this. I use this paper a lot in my thesis and the papers we're publishing, because they have this sense that it's not, so I'm giving it temporally. So I'm talking about past events, memories of past events, positive. But we're doing it now. With this reification is happening all the time, actually. Reification, if I have, I was used to do it with babies and toddlers. We can do it with politicians too. Like, if a person, it's very easy. A person says something objectionable. Let's do it with children. It's just easier to get it. So I have a toddler throwing a tantrum, right? And it's easy to imagine. Let's do it in your favorite cafe, right? While you're having breakfast or something. So toddlers throw. So then, is it the toddler? And so of course, it's unpleasant. That's all right, isn't it? I encounter tantrum, negative feeling. You remember this model, right? Negative feeling. Okay. So is the negative feeling a result of the toddler or the toddler's behavior? Thank you. Shout it out. Behavior. Yeah. Because they're different, right? The toddler is not the toddler's behavior. Surely. Is that all right? No objections on it. Okay. So the question then is, to me, is that the appearance? Am I sitting here thinking, ooh, that toddler's behavior is eliciting a negative reaction? Or do I just save time and decide it's a naughty child? The appearance of a bad, misbehaving child. So you don't have to answer it. I'll just tell you, I'll be honest about it. That's what appears to me at first. Like a misbehaving child, bad child. It's not what's happening. What's happening is there is a toddler, and from causes and conditions I don't understand, because I very deliberately don't have children. But I'm married to an early childhood teacher. She was for a long time. So causes and conditions creating behavior. The behavior is eliciting a negative response. That's no big deal, right? But now if I fuse, or I reify, I fuse this feeling onto the child as a bad child. And if I do that, right, my next step, assuming it's my child, is I'm going to deal with the child and not the behavior. This is critically important. This reification is happening in real time, all the time. I mean, if I think that all, Americans, racism is a great example. If you think a whole ethnic group is something smart, not smart, violent, whatever, then when you meet those people, that's how you treat them in real time. Not based in reality at all, in real time. And so this is, this idea of reification is really, really important, critically important. Expectations are feeding into it. Expectations of having a peaceful breakfast, expectations of the child acting, according to my parameters. Yeah, absolutely. So all those expectations are there, and that's the right child, that's the perfect child. And then the child does not adhere to mine, and then it creates a negative, and I just impute back out onto the child, bad kid, bad child, naughty child. It's really problematic, because if you have a bad child, there's nothing you can do. You just give up. What can you do? If you have a child whose behavior is something, then it has causes and conditions. You've just got a bad child, you're in trouble, right? That's why there's no bad people. Yeah, now I've really upset somebody, surely. Yeah, possibly. But I like this example because I'm married to an expert in child development, right? And so, whereas I'm just helpless, right? Like, I just have this fear expression. But no, if you have somebody who knows what's happening, might decipher that, because this situation has happened repeatedly in my life. The person next to me understands what's happening right away and can actually intervene in certain ways that will help. If you understand the causes and conditions that are bringing it about, you have potential. Will you have 100% success rate? No, of course not. Will you get it right every time? No. But no, actually, it would be possible to intervene. Whereas if you have a naughty child, you just discipline the child. And so if you can unfuse all that and pull it apart and understand what's actually happening. So for example, child's throwing a tantrum, negative. So for a moment, I have a bad child. It appears to me, I understand what's happening. I can have some mindfulness training. I can get rid of that fairly fast. No problem. It's not a bad child. I can relax into it. Fine. And then that's it. But actually, Kirsty or somebody who knows there might be a lot more they can do. I would not intervene because I for sure make it worse. But someone who knows what's happening might. So in fact, it's quite parallel to having insight training in a way. Is that okay? Yeah? A politician, sure. A politician is doing something objectionable. I know this is hard. Really try to imagine this. So you have a politician doing something objectionable, right? is it the person or their behavior? They should know better, but this is, actually, I'll give you another hypothetical. Imagine a child. Actually, no, there's a lot of background to this. No, let's just stick with this. It still works the same way, right? Yeah, you can justify all these things, absolutely. But nonetheless, is it that is it the person or is it what the person's doing and saying that's upsetting you? And I hate to do this to you, but if you've already agreed with a child that it's the behavior and not the child, you're a bit stuck here, right? I mean, I'm sorry. But actually, it's not like if that was a bad person, then when they stopped doing the objectionable thing, they'd be all right. Sorry, when they stopped doing the objectionable thing, you'd be okay with them, right? So it's not any way you look at it. It's a person and a person's actions, and the actions, I would argue, are what upsets me. I haven't gone to happiness and stuff, so I'm a bit stuck. I can flesh this out a lot more next week, which they probably are. So yes. We're doing it repetitively. So
and people are saying.
And what's your question? Because I can think of numerous examples of a person who's repeatedly doing something objectionable and not trying to change. Okay. What's the question? Okay, thank you. You just shout it out, right? That's okay. We're friends. Yeah, aren't they a bad person? Well, no. They're doing objectionable things that are damaging and destructive. Quite possibly things we should stop. We should intervene and stop if we can. Yeah, which may well be cause suffering and problems, all sorts of stuff. But yes, I'm not saying you just sit there and you don't just think, oh yeah, well, I can see this happening, this negative feeling, I'm attributing it to the child or to the politician. If I just relax, I can see it, oh now it's all great. Meanwhile the world's burning. So no. We can still go in and try to intervene, but if you keep attacking people, people fight back. If you go in and try to change behavior, that you have a much better chance of doing something. Right? You just keep attacking people, yeah, it's not going to work. Well, yeah, you could get lucky. But the idea is that there aren't bad people. There are people doing objectionable things. Right? That's what's actually happening. They appear to me as bad people because things don't exist the way they appear. I think in a room like this, we can all agree on that. Things don't exist the way they appear. So you have to question this. Of course, there are also no good people. Right? Like, how could there be? There's people doing inspiring things. Yeah, just people. Doing, and I don't know about you, but from my side, doing a mix of virtuous, non-virtuous, and neutral things, And most of the damaging kind of non-virtuous things that I'm doing accidentally out of a mistaking, like out of some kind of delusion, some kind of mistaken understanding of reality and so on. Bad day and I'm grumpy, I have those. Yeah, absolutely. So that's the point, and so we'll unpack this as much as you like. The point I'm trying to make is that it comes from this reification. Right? And then you can see it. This is just, I like to put these up. I've had these for years. I use the same ones just because you have this whole conversation about anger and politicians. But here's some examples, right? Suspicious houses watching your every step. This is the idea. You present it with one thing and then you reify onto it, like you anthropomorphize it, right? You make it a facial expression. There's a whole website called Faces in Things. I love this. Our plan is so diabolical we can barely contain ourselves. But consistently for years now, my favorite has always been chicken church. Again, the point being you're presented with one thing, but you're interpreting it differently, right? Yeah, this is reification in action. It's just, there's no harm done. Yeah. It's good, isn't it? I've had this like 10 years and I can't get rid of it. I love chicken church. And if you do it with intention too, you see things like this, you sort of get this sense that it's being done intentionally, don't you? It's like this photobombing seal, which isn't the case. But again, it comes from this sense of being presented with something and then interpreting it in a certain way and then reifying that interpretation. And that's what's going on. So I want to, we're right on 8, so I'll finish up. This is where I want to go with this. That's why I sort of had this model from last time. So in terms of people in some kind of mental distress, be it emotional or over here in the pathological end, there are certain things that psychology certainly can help with. One of the biggest things is going to happen if you get people, train them to meditate, you start with mindfulness training, is this de-reification effect. This is widely accepted as one of the key kind of outcomes of all types of mindfulness training. When you start to do the type of training that we do in this Indo-Tibetan tradition, and likely other Buddhist ones I'm not familiar with, de-reification is intent. Is the intent of it, actually. It was one of the intents. So this de-reification is happening over here, right? It gets more sort of intense. I should do it like this. And then we'll finish up. I won't go past. Here's what's happening. Corey encounters pizza. He has some kind of, let's say, a positive response. Because I reify this response, because I sort of believe it immediately, it looks as if, or my experience is that the pizza is delivering the positive response. That's my experience. It's mistaken. That's my experience. The reification just keeps proliferating into an emotion, right? And same thing, it looks as if the pizza is creating an emotion. We know for sure it's not true, because if it were true, pizza would always create the same response. And it does not, right? It doesn't. So what the mechanism that makes it look as if the pizza is delivering the happiness, is this reification. This is fundamentally it. I have the positive response, I have this enjoyable emotion, and then the whole thing gets concretized in this way that makes it look as if the pizza is delivering me the happiness. And then I chase after more pizza and more, and then pizza becomes suffering. Yeah, a cause of suffering by slice number 11 or 12. And away you go. And the meditation training is designed to start to undo all of this. Not only this, and this is where we'll go next week. Actually, you keep working backwards to reify the very sense of myself, which is the root cause of the whole shebang. So we'll come to that. And I didn't get there today, but there's a bunch of super interesting psych papers about just what this means and why it's so helpful for Buddhists and so problematic sometimes for people who have adverse effects of meditation. So I'll start with that next week, assuming you're here. Okay. All right. Thank you. It's 3 minutes past 8. I hate keeping you over time, but I do it anyway. Thanks. Thank you, onliners too. Appreciate it. Okay, you're free to go. Domino's, yeah. Yeah. So they say go to Domino's. So they have these ideas about you, right? They have all these opinions. Yeah. But it's not you, it's your actions. Please do, if you have any questions, ideas, outbursts, send them through.